Welcome back to the MMA Dungeon. My name is Shady Bechet, and I am joined today by my boy, IamAngeloMedia on YouTube. One of the guys that I actually started watching a little bit earlier this year and then found out that we were in the same vicinity. So, hometown buddies here. We're going to go through and talk about the UFC 328 event that took place in Newark this past Saturday, Prudential Center. We both were in attendance. There's a lot to, I think, dissect and a lot of talking points to discuss. A lot of them fight related, but a lot of them also just related to kind of the narrative going into the event and going into some of these fights. So, Angelo, first of all, I want to thank you for joining me and kind of just get your thoughts overall on how the event was.
It was a great event. I'm someone who was very vocal against Sean Strickland. I had Khamzat winning this fight. I had him winning it convincingly. We all saw how that played out. So I was wrong, but I still enjoyed myself nonetheless. Being able to witness such an upset in person was something special.
That's right. That's right. I would agree. I want to start off. You kind of started us off already. I want to go right to the main event, and then maybe we can go down the list and talk about some other fights that took place in the order that they took place. But the main event first, right? The biggest narrative for me, of course, this was an upset, like you said. The biggest narrative for me was mostly about the kind of song and dance that I think Sean Strickland, Khamzat Chimaev played in the lead up to this fight. There's a lot to unpack here. There's a lot of voices out there. There's a lot of coverage already on all the major platforms and podcasts. And so I think I'd like to give my take a little bit and kind of hear from you as well. I've described kind of what's going on or what happens in buildups to fights like this as a dance, right? An unspoken dance that takes place between two fighters. One person always has to initiate, and the other person has to silently, I think for the most part, because I don't think there's a lot of communication that happens that allows this type of thing to take place. It's a silent agreement. It's almost as if, they say there's like twin telepathy. They say couples sometimes can look at each other when they're out in public and kind of communicate. They give them a certain look and the other gives a look back, and it's like a whole conversation took place. And I think the same thing exists in the fighting world. I think it's very clear that Sean Strickland was the initiator. He initiated the dance in the narrative leading up to this fight, right? He started saying things. I think he took events that took place in the past, some exchanges, their training history, and maybe convinced himself that there was a certain vibe or something that really didn't happen, or a hatred that maybe isn't as justifiable. And he used that to, as I'm saying, initiate this dance. He put his arm out, and Khamzat silently kind of accepted that challenge. He gave that silent look that the couple or the twin will give back. And now they find themselves building a fight in a way that, it rivals, I guess, some of the most hatred-filled fight lead-ups of all time. That's how I saw this kind of play out. Now, we can talk a little bit, and I want to get your take on the things that were said, what lines may have been crossed or not crossed, talking about religion, talking about family, talking about countries and things like that. But what's your take kind of on the fact that this dance exists in general, and that Sean kind of initiated it, and Khamzat was willing to play that game, and that it was a game or a dance in general?
Well, they had me hook, line, and sinker. I did not think it was some choreographed dance that we ultimately found out that it was. I thought it was legitimate. The things Sean Strickland was saying, he's been saying for a while. He's taken shots at Islam and the Muslim people for years. Before the Khamzat Chimaev fight was even signed, they joked about Khamzat. Well, Strickland said that Khamzat called himself a terrorist as a joke. I believe that was Khamzat letting Strickland know, hey, I saw your comments, and now you got one in front of you, and let's see how this plays out. That's what I think that was when they first met and he made that comment. But, yeah, they caught me hook, line, and sinker. And as for what Strickland was saying, who am I to say what is unforgivable, right? I think, we can all be redeemed and things like that. But my main point here is I don't need that. I go back to 2009 watching this sport. I never had to see guys hate each other in order to watch them fight. I was just interested in the martial arts and the fighting and two guys at the top of their game putting their skills up against each other. Nowadays, it seems, in order to capture the casual audience, they placate to that and they pretty much promote hatred, which is 100% a negative influence. And for Sean Strickland to come out after the fact and say all of these things, I want to apologize to my Muslim fans, I want to apologize to Chechnyan fans, all these people. It's like, dude, it's hypocritical because he could have been an example. He could be himself, right? Rather than who people expect him to be. He could be himself and be a positive example for the MMA culture rather than propagating the nonsense BS idiocracy that we have in 2026.
Yeah, I mean, listen, just like you, they had me, hook, line, and sinker as well. But the reality is, also like you, we didn't really need that, and I think being at some of these fight events, some of these high tension, and I'm gonna admit, like none of them do as well. The tension never gets the way that whether it was, fraudulent or not, whether it was concocted or not, whether it was real or not, it doesn't always get the way that this main event did, especially not the cards we've had in recent years. But it I realized being there in person that we might not be the target audience. You and I are going to watch regardless.
Oh, no.
I've said it many times publicly and in conversations. If two turtles are fighting and they're in a cage of some sort, I'm going to watch, right? And I think you're very much the sentiment applies to you as well. But I suppose for whatever reason, Sean, he does strike me as someone who maybe needs that hatred, right? It's one thing, the things he said, but I do think in general he needs that type of, he needs to hate the person in front of him a little bit. He needs to build an enemy where maybe there was not one. And again, I think Khamzat, he played along, and in a universe where that is the case, which I think it kind of was. I suppose Khamzat, he maybe was receptive in a way that other fighters from maybe his religious or ethnic background would not have been, right? I'm thinking specifically if Arman was in those shoes, right? I mean, I'm trying to save the Khabib Conor talk as much as possible for a little bit later, but if Khabib was in those shoes, which we saw, I don't think it's as much of a dance. I think it is a lot more real, right? When we talk about instances like this, where there's this much security inside the cage, we do not see this very often. I don't think I've missed a UFC in I mean, it's certainly several years, a stream, an event watching it. And I've been to numerous in person. I have never seen the cage this crowded. I made the joke to the folks next to me that it looked like a boxing ring. That's the criticism that I always have, is that boxing looks like there's a million people in the ring after the fight ends. And the UFC is great in that it never feels like that. It sure as hell did in this moment. And I suppose, the other part of this discussion that we should have is there any sort of danger to this type of buildup, this type of fraudulent buildup? And in my opinion, I see you shaking your head. Yes. In my opinion, absolutely. Forget the
100%.
fact that, some people consider this, I don't know who it was. Somebody said fraud or theft. I forget that for a second. I don't even care that you are convincing millions of people of something that is not true. You're essentially lying. That's fine. I mean, this is the entertainment business. I think what's dangerous is the result that this can have on, one, the sport, how we will be seen, how the sport, whether it's fans or viewers or competitors, athletes, whatever, how they will be viewed by the outsider, the non-MMA person. And the second is the fan base. I mean, not too many events have the number of, fights or maybe the tension that existed inside of Prudential Center on Saturday. Your thoughts?
I agree 100% because even though the two fighters may be faking the funk, the fans in attendance are not. Those fans are taking it to heart. They view those fighters as people who represent them and their cultures and their religions and things of that nature. And I was in a section that was a little bit of a mix. I had some Strickland fans in there. I had one right next to me. He was pretty cool. And I had some Chimaev fans a couple of rows in front of me. And things could have gotten crazy. There was police presence everywhere. I was spotting fights in the audience, in sections across the arena from me and things like that. Luckily, there was no fights in my section, but it's possible when the atmosphere is like that. And especially when you bring up topics like religion, culture, and things of that nature. And, not for nothing, but I don't want to get too political or too whatever the case may be, but we're talking about Islam here, you know? And that's one religion that doesn't really play as opposed to, let's say, Christianity where they'll turn the other cheek. You get me? So it's one of those vibes where anything could truly happen. And to fake it, to stoke that up, why not just be an example? Why not be respectful? Why not do everything that you said after the fight, before the fight? And I guess the answer to that question would be, oh, well, you're not going to sell the fight in that case. Well, you know, I believe in build it, they will come. I believe in if you put on good fights, people who like good fights will watch. I don't think you need people who have to have drama. I mean, go watch, WWE. Go watch a reality TV show if that's the case. Are you interested in mixed martial arts or not?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you make a lot of great points. What comes to my mind in terms of like trying to put myself in the shoes of one of these fighters, what exactly are we selling it that hard for? Because pay-per-view points don't exist. And as somebody, as somebody who lives in the area of Newark, New Jersey, Prudential Center, their events almost always either sell out or very close to sell out, and the remaining tickets sell during the event so that buffer can call it the sold out Prudential Center by the time the main card or the main event happens. The point is, there was no they're not selling this in the middle of nowhere where you need to convince people to buy tickets. Again, I say this because I think that the target audience for that type of thing, it might be exciting to us in some moments, like me and you, the hardcore fans. But I think the target audience really, when you're going that hard as Strickland was, it's the casual audience, the casual fan. And again, when we're talking about Prudential, I don't think they need to really sell it as, it's just, it's interesting to think about. There's no pay-per-view points. So why are we selling it that hard? The two of them, it kind of undermines how good the two of them are and how good that fight has the potential to be when you go that route. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
It does. It does make sense because we didn't need that. I don't think it's really, like I said earlier, 2026 idiocracy, where that's what gets pushed now. The sport today is completely different from the sport when I first got involved into it as a fan, because back then we used to have champions defending their title. Going into this fight, we had Khamzat Chimaev going into his first title defense, already talking about light heavyweight, already talking about big money fights with Alex Pereira at heavyweight. I mean, talk about taking your eye off the ball. You got Sean Strickland here, who's got almost triple the experience of you. You have what? He's got 15 fights going into Saturday night, 15-0, but Strickland has a record of 31-7. That is a battle-tested fighter if there ever was one. Multiple 5-round fights under his belt. And you're talking about Alex Pereira. You're talking about light heavyweight. And I think that's one thing that people aren't necessarily bringing up, is that Khamzat may have overlooked Sean Strickland and took this matchup for granted. And, it's a shame.
Yeah. Listen, I want to talk real quick about the whole moving up thing, but I want to just put a pin in maybe the build up and say this. This might be a hot take, and I'm interested to see what you and maybe the viewers say. This didn't even come close to the buildup of Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor. I don't think it came close. I don't think it's even in the same stratosphere, and I don't know if any fight ever will. And if you ask me, I don't even think this is a debate, because if you ask me for proof or evidence, I will show you in the form of one of 1,000 photos. This right here. This would have never happened. Am I saying that I'm upset that they embraced? Absolutely not. I don't care. I didn't need the buildup to be as bad as it was. I didn't need the fake beef or the hatred. So I don't care that much about the embracing and the, whether it's fraudulent or not. But all I'm saying is this right here is proof that we will never, not that it's the bar in which we need to aim for, but we will never have a buildup or a fight with as much bad blood as we did at UFC 229 when Khabib Nurmagomedov submitted Conor McGregor. We will never have a buildup like that. We will never see a buildup like that, and I don't think we'll ever see anything come close to it. Your thoughts?
When I see photos like that, what comes to my mind is you cannot say salam alaikum and congrat about whiskey. Remember when that happened in that
Right.
moment? You know, Habib took
Right.
that very serious. Like, that was a very serious vibe. And for Sean to say the things he said about Khamzat, his mother, his country, his culture, his religion, and then to give him a hug afterwards, you know, I'm into theology and things like that. I was listening to prominent Muslim content creator Mohammed Hijab. Perhaps you've heard of him. Mohammed Hijab did a video talking about this fight, and he was basically saying that Sean Strickland is not absolved for the things he was saying about their faith. Because, you know, in fact, in Islam, you are not instructed to even be nice to people like that. You know what I'm saying? I understand Khamzat just spent 25 minutes with him and it was intimate, you know, bloodshed, all this stuff. Sure. But at the end of the day, like, you're hugging a guy that propagated hate towards you, your family, your country, your religion, all things like that. If you're going to hate each other, make it real. I don't want you to fake it. I don't want to know that it was faked afterwards. At least keep up the act. You know what I'm saying? Because
Right.
now, if let's say you do a rematch,
Yep.
which I know we're going to get to in a moment. Let's say you do a rematch. I feel as though it's kind of lost some of its luster now. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
the fans now maybe have to change up their perspective. And I mean, who knows? Maybe Sean Strickland will come out and condemn some of his fans for commenting the things that they do. You know what I mean? And Hamzat vice versa. But I don't see that happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess let's jump right into the little tidbit that you hinted at there. The rematch, right? Dana White, in his discussion with the media right after, says that Khamzat, after the fight, after he wrapped the belt around Strickland, I must add, but enough of that. He goes to Dana White and he says, "I'm moving up. I'm not making this cut again." And I believe that that is a true sentiment that he walked into this fight with. I you know, from what I heard, media folks, people at the fighter hotel, and also just publicly available information, it was a tough weight cut. There's all the numbers being thrown around. There's the controversy of the scale not settling. There's Armand saying 46 pounds. You know, that's a whole thing that we can get into. But my thing is, Khamzat makes what seems to be an honest, you know, statement to Dana that he just can't make that weight cut. Which, again, he's moving up from another weight class. Right? This would be a second move up, and then he immediately, not immediately, it might have been this, you know, the morning after, whatever, begins to tweet "See you soon" at Sean Strickland, and is tweeting up, you know, alluding to some sort of rematch. Now, whether an immediate rematch was warrant, forget if the fight deserves a rematch, because I think Sean Strickland's fighting style lends to it lends itself to a situation where almost all of his wins feel like they kind of earned a rematch. But the fact that he, you know, it seems like he cannot make his mind up, and so that is where I am confused and lost as to what is next for Khamzat. And is he ruining his chances of the UFC saying you can now move up for a second time? You only have 16 fights. Not all of them are with the UFC, by the way, but you can now move up for a second time. You know, what are these tweets? They're not helping your case.
I believe the second tweet is what is the true feeling and the true sentiment, because in the moment you just lost, you're looking for any excuse for why you lost, right? Anything you could cope with. In his mind, it's the weight cut. So he tells Dana, "Man, I ain't doing this no more," right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, fine. Couple of hours go by. Maybe he slept on it. Maybe he got a phone call from you know, his boy over in Chechnya, you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? He shall not be named, right? Um and no, man, you're gonna rematch that guy. Or maybe within himself, as a competitor, he realizes, hey, that was a close fight, and how could I just go out like that? I can't just go out like that, right? I think as a competitor, deep down, Khamzat Chimaev wants that rematch.
Yeah.
And for him to just leave that alone, that he can't let that sit there. I don't know how, as a competitor, he could let that sit there. If you lose, especially as an undefeated fighter, especially as such a dominant fighter the way he's been, you got to get that back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the fight to make. That was my initial reaction when it first happened. You got to do the rematch again. The problem with Khamzat Chimaev, like you mentioned earlier, Arman Tsarukyan cited 46 pounds. That's utterly ridiculous. That cannot happen. I believe between the Dricus du Plessis fight and the Strickland fight, Khamzat just got too big. And he decided he was going to study for the exam the week of the exam.
Right.
You get me? As opposed to being in proper shape year round, not getting too big, not thinking about light heavyweight, not thinking about heavyweight for these big money fights with Alex Pereira. Focus on the task at hand and your responsibility of as being the middleweight champion and, you know, carrying yourself as a middleweight in your physical form. Why are you walking around so much heavier when you're a middleweight? That's part of these guys' job, is to stay in shape year round. And he failed to do that, and he suffered the consequences.
Yeah. I'd agree. I think that moving up probably, because I don't think he's big for his weight class, but moving up 2 weight classes, it's not going to solve a lot of the problems that I think he has evident by that fight, right? Whatever he couldn't deal with, he couldn't deal with some of Strickland's wrestling, which I don't think it's the best wrestling in the world. It sounds hater to say that. Like, it sounds like I'm being a hater. By the way, I had no real like skin in the game. At this point, I make my picks on Tapology. I got the first 10 right. I got the last 3 wrong. And so once I start getting them wrong, I don't really care what the result is. I don't have a preference. I love to see an underdog story. But my point is, and by the way, I did score it for Chimaev in the moment. When I went back and rewatched, I can tell, like, I'm totally fine. I can stomach a Strickland score there. But I just don't think that moving up is the solution. The problem here is I don't think that a rematch is a solution either, because Strickland has this way of not allowing any of his fights to be super clear unless he finishes them. Evident by the fact that I just mentioned him, DDP, it's not, maybe one was clearer than the other, but he has that habit, his fighting style, the jabs and teeps. Everybody talks about it. There's jokes all over, and a lot of it is true and merited in true statements. His fighting style lends to a reality where all of his fights look freaking close. It's tough. So I don't know what you think a rematch is merited. It sounds like a little bit more sure than I.
Absolutely, because you got a guy in Khamzat Chimaev who was undefeated, granted only 15-0, not all those fights in the UFC like you mentioned, but still an undefeated fighter. Arguably the biggest name in the sport, right? Certainly top 3 big names in the sport, I would think.
So he's up there, yeah.
And he lost to Strickland. What are you going to do? Strickland versus Amosov? The rematch? Didn't they fight and Strickland won already, right? Didn't that happen?
Yes.
So, is that really what is going to sell? Because we could talk about meritocracy all we want, but at the same time, we can't be stuck in the past either. We have to think about this the way the UFC would think about this. And the UFC ain't thinking about meritocracy, okay? They're thinking about what would sell. And what would sell is possibly maybe Strickland versus du Plessis again, maybe. But even that, Strickland lost those, even though the buildup is fun in that. But the fight, 100%, if we're talking about views, if we're talking about buildup, if we're talking about things like that, it's got to be Khamzat Chimaev versus Sean Strickland. And like you were saying before about moving up to light heavyweight, I don't think it's easy at light heavyweight for Khamzat Chimaev. I think there's guys at light heavyweight that now, not just light heavyweight, but middleweight as well, everybody going forward with Khamzat Chimaev looks at him differently. That aura of invincibility has dissipated. And he is no longer this boogeyman. He looked very human against Sean Strickland. And you could argue he looked weak. I mean, Faraz Sahabi, world-renowned coach of George St. Pierre, et cetera, he mentioned on his live stream, he called him a weak kitten. That's what he said he looked like,
And he begged him to come train at TriStar.
He did. He said, come train at TriStar with me
Won't
and George.
happen.
And
Won't happen.
No. But, it's worth a shot. You miss all the shots you don't take, so props for us taking that. But yeah, I think, for example, I think Paulo Costa, if he fought Chimaev at light heavyweight, all Costa got to do is stuff a couple takedowns or even survive a first round with Khamzat Chimaev, and that energy may dip. We're going to see how that looks, because keep in mind, he's looked human before. Khamzat Chimaev looked human against Gilbert Burns. He looked human against Kamaru Usman. he kind of bounced back and he dominated Robert Whittaker. He dominated Dricus du Plessis. He dominated Kevin Holland back in the day. You know, he has these dominant performances, but he also has these moments where he does look human. And now after his first loss, we realize, oh, he is. You know what I mean? He truly is. And I don't know what you do, because I don't think he could lose again to Strickland. If you do the Strickland rematch, he might lose twice. Strickland might just be a better fighter than Khamzat Chimaev. He's more battle tested. He has 38 total fights in his career. Yeah. Khamzat Chimaev has 16. That's a big discrepancy. And by the way, Khamzat should have way more. Khamzat Chimaev should have way more fights, but for whatever reason, he decided to be more inactive with his career. You know, he has to observe at least 3 months, because you can't prepare for a fight during this time period, and you can't fight immediately after the Ramadan period. 3 months of the year, 1/4 of the year, he's out. Okay, with that. And then of course you've got, you know, just general inactivity. He fought Dricus du Plessis back in it was August, right? Of last year. I believe it was August in last year, and now he's fighting in May. You're telling me he couldn't fight before that? I think you set yourself up for failure when you stay stagnant and you're not active and you're not keeping the ball rolling with momentum. This sport moves real fast, and we're seeing it in real time with Khamzat.
Yeah. And I mean, I want to put a pin on the trifecta we're seeing here that I talked about before we started recording, but there's this triangle going on, right? Where it's DDP beats Strickland beats Khamzat beats DDP. And this is one of the classic examples, and I love these examples, where MMA math does not seem to make sense. Now, some of those wins looked a little bit more dominant than the other, but it does make it, I guess for us, it makes it weird and tricky, because maybe we don't know what we want to see, or none of the fights, none of the next steps for these three guys, if it's any matchup of any two of the three, doesn't appeal that much. But to the UFC, maybe it's good news, because they can essentially do whatever combination they want. Now, I don't know if I want to see DDP Strickland 2, only because of the fact that I put all three of these fighters, and this is another one of those takes where people might look at me weird. I think all three of these fighters have a inherently boring fight style. You know, maybe not I suppose it's not the flashiest. It's entertaining, I think, because I know the narrative, because I know the history. And that's one of the things I said about this fight, even, is this was the most entertaining that these two gentlemen could have done. The reality is, compared to other title fights, I mean, let's look at the co-main event. I mean, that the fight between Strickland and Khamzat is not a fight that I am showing to anybody to get them into the sport at all. It's nowhere on the list. You know, it's
not
very
even
far
in the
down.
conversation.
Right. So when I say something like, this is the most entertaining fight that the two of them could have given us, all I'm saying is, we know how Sean Strickland, you know, we know the impersonation memes. We see him all the time. We know what his fights look like. I've seen enough of them in person that I kind of have if you blurred them a little bit and blurred out his opponent, I sometimes can't tell the fight. Obviously, there were some wrestling exchanges, but there's that about Strickland. And then Khamzat, again, with very few exceptions, his fights kind of look the same. There was a line on a lot of betting, sports books, on how soon he would shoot for a takedown. And there's the whole, his takedowns are impressive, and it's like a tackle and it's across the cage. Ultimately, on the ground, he doesn't chase finishes the way I think someone like Islam Makhachev does. I think he is comfortable. I don't know if sandbagging is the term, but he's comfortable laying there. So my point is, this was the most entertaining that these two gentlemen could have been. But I don't know if I want to see a rematch.
I definitely hear you on that, because it was, being there live, it was entertaining, on the edge of your seat action, because you know the context, because you know the stakes are so high. However, how much replay value there is in the fight, one of those, like you said, putting someone onto the sport of MMA, hey, watch this fight, oh my God, that's not happening, right? As for what you said about the Chimaev and the way his style is, how he prefers positional control over chasing finishes, I think that's something he has to work on. But again, we have to remember, this guy's inexperienced. We have to remember this. Only 16 fights now in the sport. I don't think that gets talked about enough. And I think what happens in the 2026 landscape of MMA is guys go out there and they look great. And then what happens is they get a fan base behind them and they get hyped up. And we kind of live in the hype land, in imagination land, in the fan fiction land. And these fans, they write out these comments and they come up with these ideas. And oh my God, Khamzat would destroy Anderson Silva and all this stuff that they say. And it's like, bro, can he defend his title first? You know what I mean? They like to put the cart before the horse. And I think the conversation that people should start having is, was Khamzat Chimaev possibly overrated? Was he possibly over, again, only 16 fights, man. Only 16 fights. That's not a lot. And I would also say, in terms of Khamzat's style, Khabib said something very interesting on a podcast about a year ago, where he talks about Khamzat Chimaev. The mistakes that he made against Gilbert Burns and Kamaru Usman is that he grapples real hard, but if he can't get the finish early, he ends up striking with guys, and he's tired, so then he starts getting beaten up, and he looks weak, and it's a lesser version of himself, as opposed to just striking from the jump and mixing in the grappling. That was Khabib's point. Now, I would argue that Khamzat is kind of like a Conor McGregor, but in terms of grappling. I think if he can't get that finish early on with that initial tidal wave, with that initial, burst, if he can't find that, it's going to increase the opponent's chances round by round. Now, you could say, oh, well, what about Dricus du Plessis? I got nothing for you, I don't know if maybe Dricus didn't report an injury. We don't know. This sport is crazy, man. There's personal reasons why people lose fights. There's, the ego. There's family problems. There's injuries that go unreported. And sometimes people just get beat up because they lost to the better fighter. But ultimately, I think Khamzat Chimaev has to learn with experience, and he doesn't have that yet. And when he is in there, a lot of the time, he gets it done quick. Against Robert Whittaker, he goes in there and smashes him in what? 2-3 minutes less? Kevin Holland, how long did that last? 40 seconds? You know what I mean? A lot of his fights are very quick, and you don't learn on the job that way. You're in and out. I think it's almost better to get experience and to get more time under your belt and to get fights, to not get pushed towards a title shot immediately the way kind of Khamzat got it. I think he's very inexperienced, and these are things that he has to learn from.
Do you, and I want to move on so we could talk about the rest of the card, but I wanted to touch on this real quick. Do you put any, what do you make of the fact that, I guess we can use the word he chose to stand for a lot of that fight and strike with Strickland, even at moments where a lot of folks in the arena, I'd imagine your section as well, were wondering, why is he not shooting? Maybe the people rooting for him were thinking, what are you doing? Why are you not shooting? You make anything of that?
I think he didn't choose to. I think he was forced to strike with him. I think when he did shoot on him in round 2, we saw what happened. He had to pull guard, and he lost that round, and it was just looking bad for him in that way. I think he has to expend so much energy on these takedowns. His game is Mike Tyson style, but for grappling. Conor McGregor, but for grappling. I'm going to go in there and hit you as hard as I can, and if you fall, that's great. Everybody's going to love me. But if you don't fall, my stamina bar's dropped. And that is essentially Khamzat Chimaev with the wrestling. And I don't think he chose to strike with Strickland. I think he was forced to. And he was essentially a fish out of water there, because a lot of those times he's throwing punches at Strickland, he's missing. Strickland's hitting him. He's blocking him with the elbow. He's deflecting a lot of the shots. Sure, jab for jab, Strickland was wearing it on his nose. Okay, fine. But overall, I just, I thought he looked like a fish out of water, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, I ask because I haven't publicly spoken about this before, and maybe I'm making a connection here where one doesn't exist, but I recently was having a conversation with the coach linked to a prominent multi-time defending UFC champion, and was told that they have for certain heard or been told by folks within the UFC that when the Paramount deal came about, and I mean, I guess this isn't really much of a secret, it's just to hear it explicitly was shocking a bit to me when the Paramount deal, came together, that the UFC was given requests, I don't know if orders is the right word, but requests to try to steer away from recruiting and signing fighters that have more ground game than striking. And this is, I think that's something that's been speculated. But again, given who this person is and who they are linked to, I think that they were given a heads up by the UFC that this is something that they're headed towards. And with the Paramount era, there was discuss. The wordage was interesting. It was like fighters from certain regions. With that being said, I think that if a narrative like this is being translated over to all the champions, I can't help but think like maybe that's why Khamzat was a little bit more willing to. I agree with you that he didn't choose to. Had it looked like he chose to, maybe like Bilal did in his fight against JDM, had it looked like he chose to, I think that this would have been a bigger story as to why did he choose to, and this would have been more relevant. The connection in the light bulb would have been a lot brighter to me, which is like, I remember having that conversation that there was an explicit request, right? There was words. I don't know if it's in writing. I doubt it's in writing, but there was requests from Paramount to UFC to try to move towards a heavier striking roster, a more, or if it's finishes, if it's ground game, it's finish heavy, not so much Khamzat that we saw against DDP. And again, we didn't see that, but to your point, and I agree, I don't know if it was his choice, but it's something that I think is worth exploring and looking into, future fights. I think there's people who got in ahead of the curve, right? Khamzat has been here much longer than the Paramount deal, so it's not like he's at risk. I don't think he's really in danger. I don't think even the champion that this coach is linked to is in danger. But I think if you are a newcomer to the sport, I think if you are a fighter who fights like Khamzat did in his last, maybe not this fight, the last 3 or 4, you're probably not getting signed anytime soon. But maybe, that's not why, it's not something that ran through his head at all.
I think that is, first of all, that's news to me. I've never heard that before. But I do trust you and your sources, most definitely. I know how well connected you are into this game, for absolutely. But with that said, at that point, we kind of got to look at the legitimacy of the UFC. At that point, we got to start, I'll say it, we got to start wondering if some fights are fixed. We got to start wondering about X, Y, and Z. Like, this isn't good if that's the case, because now, and I've said this for a while, this is no longer the best fight the best. This is no longer, hey guys, we're here at the Ultimate Fighting Championships to find out who the ultimate fighter in the world is.
Mm-hmm.
No. We're here to find out who the most popular fighter in the world is.
Who the most viral fighter is.
Yes, that's what this is about. Who is most viral? Who is most popular? Who gets the most clicks? Who gets the most streams? Go on the Aiden Ross stream. Go on the Neon stream. Push yourself. Get yourself out there. That's what this is about now. It is no longer about meritocracy. It is no longer about who is actually the best in the world, if that is to be the case. And I just think, hey, man, it makes me want that Netflix card to succeed. It makes me want that, that MVP Promotions, and I'm not a fan of those guys either, but it makes me want other platforms to be built. That way we can have, some legitimacy here.
I think, and this is, I guess, the last thing I'll say on that topic. Like, if I remove myself as a fan, or somebody who does this type of content creation in the space, if I just make myself a business person, I put on my business cap, being in Prudential and being even some previous cards, maybe not so much the one-offs, the spheres, but being in maybe just a casual city, the over-under on how quickly a boost starts the second 2 guys hit the fence.
Yes.
That line would be like 5 seconds. Like, I started playing this game with some of the folks near me. Chael Sonnen was a few feet away from me, fell out of his card. Yes. And like, I saw him kind of chuckle at some points. Like, you might have noticed, people were just, there's the fan who was booing, and then there's the fan who's like, are you out of your mind? They just hit the fence for 5 seconds. The over under is super short. So from that perspective, from that stance, I get it. They do, the UFC, as much as they want to be a sport, and they are a sport, and we know it's a sport that we know and love. It's number one in my book for sure. As much as that is the case, They do not want an arena of 18,000 people booing at any point.
I think they need to do a better job of promoting the MA in MMA, martial arts, rather than promote this idea of violence and things like that. They need to promote martial arts, and they need to have fans understand. And it's almost going backwards, you know? It's literally like, I remember, if you go back and you watch some old fights from 2006, 2005, you'll see the same thing, fans booing immediately. And then around, 2013 to like 20 whatever, you'll hear Rogan on commentary say, "Oh wow, this is a really educated crowd. They just clap for Butterfly Guard," or whatever the case may be, right? We went backwards, guys.
Right.
We went backwards. And now you're seeing grappling get initiated for 5 seconds. And yes, there's tons of boos around me in the venue. And it's concerning. It's quite literally the erosion of the sport for the sake of money. And I'll say this before we go on to the next topic, but I don't think people are talking about this enough. This, in 2025, WME was purchased by private equity firm Silver Lake. And that essentially means that the UFC and WWE, all those entities purchased by WME, are owned by private equity now, owned by them. Yeah. And if anybody knows anything about private equity, it's basically flipping houses, but flipping businesses. And what they do is they prioritize profits, and they could care less about the product itself. They just want to make as much money on the product itself. And when you do that, you sort of sell your soul. And that's what a lot of people are saying when it comes to TKO products like WWE and UFC. It seems soulless now. It seems like a true corporate entity. The last thing I'll say on that is, for anybody that doesn't know anything about private equity, don't take it from me. Look up Warren Buffett, private equity, and you will see his comments on it where he quite literally calls it a fraud scheme. You get me? So that's Warren Buffett talking about it, not just IamAngeloMedia. So take it away.
Yeah, I mean the sale and the fact that there's stakeholders and UFC is no longer the pride and joy of one man or a few men. It's a publicly traded entity. It's a business, and the reality is it's more an entertainment business than it is a sport business, than it is a sport league. But that's we could talk about this for hours. Real quick, let's jump into some of the other news of that card, the UFC 328. It was, in my opinion, I said this on the last episode, that this was one of the most stacked cards of the year. I think that it got overshadowed maybe by the Miami card. I think even though it's certainly not the most stacked, the White House card, a lot of news about exciting cards and people's rankings of cards. I think this one was up there, just the name value and the skill that was on the card. But let's start from the bottom here in chronological order. I want to talk to you a little bit about Khamzat Chimaev's friend, Baisangur Susurkaev. He took on Jordan Santos. It was one of the, I think, prelims or early prelims. I don't know how they divvied up these fights, but not that much to really say about him. I think that he's an incredible fighter. I think he's a hot prospect. I think it's fun. It's cool that this killer of a fighter, Khamzat Chimaev, has one of his training buddies now in there, and they're kind of taking on the roster by storm. Forget the fact that Chimaev lost. Really going into this fight. What I think is not cool is when it feels like a fighter is a little bit too in over their head, I guess I could say, right? Like, I'm alluding to the fact that, especially watching in person, and he's done this in previous fights as well, or at least his last one, he has a tendency of emoting and celebrating and being a little bit too showmanship-y in fights that are not as close as he makes it seem, right? And I think we've seen this before in instances where it made sense. I think Merab Dvalishvili has done this against Sean O'Malley with the whole like kissing on the back and pointing and laughing. He's done it there where it made sense. I think he was winning the fight dominantly. We've seen it from the same guy. We've seen it from Merab. I think he was pointing at Umar Nurmagomedov in moments where I don't think he should have been emoting. So we've seen good examples and bad examples of this, and it might be much to do about nothing. But the point is, in person, it's quite frustrating. And as somebody who's trying to analyze not just the exact fight that's happening in this very moment and how it would be scored, but also, how willing does somebody look to learn, and how do they look like, I'm trying to predict how they're going to be as a prospect. How do they feel about their own game? When we hear a fighter say, I won, but I didn't love how I won, it says something about their promise. You're going to take that into consideration when picking next time, who you think is going to fight, when trying to predict their future matchups, when you're trying to predict their future outcomes. That means that person is willing to learn. They are not, they don't put themselves too high of a pedestal. Forget the whole humble, personality thing. The point is, the emoting has to stop, man. I mean, it's ridiculous. He spent half this fight emoting. I'm so glad that I found this photo, and shout out to Ed. I'm so glad I found this photo, because in person, this is the exact moment that I wanted to spot. I didn't know there was a picture, obviously. This happened right after he was emoting. He was doing some sort of smiley celebration, and then he gets rocked, and it looks here like a crazy punch or whatever. Like this in person, it looked like a quick reactive jab from Santos. Like, and he gets rocked in his face. Like he doesn't have his hand up properly. Talk to me about what it was like to what were you as frustrated as I was watching him in person?
I thought this is a guy who believes far too much in his hype, and not just his hype, but his hype is sort of predicated off of his connection to Chimaev. You know what I mean? He hasn't earned anything yet so far. He's got a few wins in the UFC. I've watched him on Fight Pass for sure. But with that said, this isn't someone that is like, when I watched him, when I see him doing these taunts, when I see him, first of all, had he not gotten the finish, he would have lost by decision, I feel. I had him losing.
Agreed.
Yeah, I thought he was losing, and he needed that finish. And he ended up getting it. Winners are going to win. Fair enough. He pulled it out the fire, Pull it out the fire, man. He pulled it out. I get it. But with that said, he is, I don't see him being a champion or even a top contender. I don't think he has it. I think he'll have a good living. He'll have a career in the UFC, sure. But I just don't think he has that it quality.
Yeah. I put him tied with Tommy McMillan in terms of a little bit in over their head. Respect to the two of them. Warriors I think I always say, you make it to the UFC, you are better than 99.99%. I mean, this is not even an opinion. This is a fact. Like, if you make it to the UFC, with the exception of very few people who, for whatever reason, are not signed or do not pursue it, you can outfight, you can defend yourself against 99% of the human population. So I would never sit here and disrespect his fighting abilities, but if any fighter that makes you sit there and say, why are you emoting? Why are you doing this? You are losing. My brother, you are losing. Like, I want you to win. I either picked you or I'm a fan of you, or I want to see two fighters be the greatest fighters they possibly can. You're emoting, but you're losing on the scorecards. That is frustrating. That's extremely frustrating. And I think it sometimes could do more harm than damage. I know that they're trying to build up, they're trying to, I guess, keep up with, like, again, the hype of Chimaev, the hype of, in Tommy McMillan's instance, the hype of his buddy Sean O'Malley, the hype that, Arman has, having this, Marab obviously has it, this showmanship about you, it pays off. I mean, the greatest to do it in boxing is Mayweather, as far as showmanship goes, in my opinion. And Conor is one of the greatest in the UFC to ever have this, like, this fun personality. But you don't ever see them emoting when they're losing. You rarely see them emoting when they're losing, and so it was hard to watch. But that's really my take on it.
I agree. Not much else to say besides the one thing I will give Tommy McMillan his credit, though. At least he went in there and finished the guy. He went in there, and if you're gonna do these things, if you're gonna be brash, if you're gonna showboat, you gotta make it not close, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're going to showboat, show us why you're showboating. You know what I mean? Show us that there are levels here. And I didn't see that. I saw him get the finish, sure, but ultimately he was losing that fight. And it reminds me of Anderson Silva versus Damian Maia back in the day, when Dana White was furious with him after the event. And he was saying, like, dude, if you're that much better than the guy, go after him. Finish him.
Yep. It's more showy to you will garner more love and respect and oohs and ahs if you show off with your fighting, not show off because you're shimmying and smiling and pointing. But anyway, that's enough with that. Next fight I wanted to discuss very briefly, and it's more so just the story that came out of it, and it's very sad news, very unfortunate. And as somebody who has met both Grant Dawson and his wife, it definitely hit me hard. Grant Dawson reveals after his hard fought battle and win at UFC 328 that his wife Ellie Dawson actually experienced a miscarriage during fight week, so Monday. And he mentioned it just like in passing. It almost seemed like he was reluctant to mention it, which of course anybody would. It's just such a sensitive topic, and I think they're with how recent that was, they're still going through it. But this is something that I love about MMA. These, like, when you hear about the challenges that people are facing, like Jim Miller's son, had just beat a form of cancer, and forget the fact that forget his age and he's, I mean, even though it doesn't seem like he's at the tail end of his career, when you hear from these fighters that, like, I am human and I'm going through this stuff, and I do not control when these things happen, and the cards are stacked against me just like they are anybody else, and they go out and they put on these performances. It makes them very relatable, and it makes your heart break in certain ways. And so my deepest sympathies to Ellie and Grant. I actually reached out to them and sent them my condolences for what happened. But I want to just give him his flowers. Like, kudos to him for not pulling out the fight, for showing incredible heart. I mean, in that cage, but I guess it's synonymous to the heart that he's showing that week, that he did all his media, he did every obligation up until he won the fight. And it only came up, seemingly accidentally in his post-win interview. So just wanted to say that about Grant Dawson's performance, and how hearing that about him just makes the performance that much more incredible.
100%. I second that. My condolences go to his wife, his family, himself, everything like that. And it just goes to show, I mentioned it earlier, we don't know what these fighters are going through. There are unreported injuries. There are personal things like this. And by the way, had he pulled out of this fight after suffering a miscarriage the week of the fight, it would have been totally understandable. Yeah. So, props to him for showing up, props for him getting it done and all things like that. But it really just goes to show that we have no idea what's truly going on with a fighter behind closed doors, and why we see the result that takes place. And, sometimes maybe this was one of those instances. It ended up being a good ending story where he does rise to the occasion. But sometimes you'll see guys go in there and they might get smoked, and you wonder, damn, well, what happened? And they don't talk about it because you don't want to be the guy who's bringing up excuses. But then you find out, like, they just lost a member of their family, or whatever the case may be. And it's sad to see.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, incredible fighter. I think incredible power couple, man. Ellie Dawson was an Invicta fighter, and I'm sure she still trains and is part of his camp. And so, just the heart that they showed was incredible. Another fight I wanted to talk about, or I guess fighter, Yaroslav Amosov, former Bellator champion, now a member of the UFC roster. I think this was his second fight, I believe. Yeah, I think this was his second fight. This man is now, 29 and 1. I think he went into this fight 29 and 1. He's now 30 and 1. My only gripe with this, and I'm not one to really care about card placement too much. I think that it is important to mention. I think it's more important than people make it seem, because it does contribute to your overall career. There's a lot of flowers that are silently given based on where you're placed on a card. When you get upgraded to co-main, when you're the feature fight, when you're the main event, when you're on the main card, there is kudos kind of being given to you by the promotion and by the sport and the organization in those moments. So, again, it's not a huge deal, but Amosov should not be fighting on the prelims. This man is 30 and 1 and has fought two people with a negative record. Like, they're not cans. He's fought two people with a negative record, and it was 1 and 2 early in his career. And he has a very decorated, roster on his resume. Like I said, one loss. Like, this is, again, the level of competition is in my opinion, comparable maybe to most of Khabib's. He's compared to Khabib because of the whole, their grappling style maybe, or how exciting they are, how the mystique, I guess. They call him the Christian Khabib. And obviously their records are very similar, right? 29-0, and he went into this fight 29-1. So to me, it just made no sense as to why other Bellator champions, right? I'm thinking Patchy Mix, other Bellator seasoned veteran, Aaron Pico, why they got maybe the push that they got. Maybe some of them coming in fighting a top 5 contender right off the bat. There's been instances of champions from other promotions coming in and getting a title shot right off the bat. Obviously, it's few and far between, but it made no sense to me why Amosov kind of took such a step back. I know that maybe name value wasn't as there for him as it is others, but ultimately it's on the matchmakers to kind of figure these things out and to kind of know who the person is. But, maybe it's a sales thing again. Like it's like, hey, we need to build you up in terms of your name value, not so much your skill. And his skill is definitely there. I mean, we saw it. That's not even to mention the dancing afterwards. But your thoughts, I guess, on the Amosov fight and maybe, the path that they've given him, it seems like a little bit of a step back to me, in the UFC at least.
I think I hear what you're saying, but I remember back when they were putting Uriah Faber on the prelims, and you kind of want to do things like that to get people to tune in for the prelims, to give people a reason to watch the prelims. If you see this guy who's 29-1 going into the fight is on the prelims, it's going to make those hardcore fans who probably are going to watch anyway, I guess, right? But you're going to give people a reason to show up for the first fight of the night, someone like myself, right? Rather than tuning in just for the main card. So I'm not too upset with the card placement, to be honest with you. Also, it speaks to how stacked the card was, right?
Yep.
If the card isn't stacked, then you're looking at these prelims and you're like, oh, yeah, these are prelim fighters. But that's how you know a card is stacked. If you look at the prelims and you say, damn, Amosov is on the prelims,
right?
That's how you know it's stacked. So
right.
I'm not too upset with the placement. But to the more important issue, that Spinaroonie might be better than Booker T Spinaroonie, man. When he hit that,
dude,
that
I
was
love
crazy.
It. I love it. That was crazy. That was a crazy celly. I never thought I'd see that from. He has a very toned down, more serious, humble demeanor. The comparisons I think to Khabib are warranted, not just fighting style or record, but maybe the way he has a more humble, respectful demeanor comes out with little toys from from his kids' collections. There's videos of him retrieving his Bellator belt from the rubbles of a war scene. And then he celebrates like that. It's like, yo, this is good. He's a star. It's like he's getting a resurgence, or maybe getting the shine that for whatever reason he didn't get another. I guess we know the reasons. It was not UFC stage, but
Right.
I think it's only up
for you.
Yes, sir.
You would know this better than me, but Patchy Mix, what is he American?
Patchy Mix, I do believe he is American. Yeah, I think I watched his Ryzen fight and he was repping US. I think that's what he repped. At least he might have different background.
So I would argue Michael Chandler, Aaron Pico, Patchy Mix, Will Brooks when he first came in back in the day. I think the guys that come from Bellator that are American fighters get that preferential treatment of, hey, we're just going to throw you right in there, as opposed to this Ukrainian guy, who, that is what he is, right? Ukrainian,
yes,
I believe.
That's right.
The Ukrainian Amosov, who isn't a native English speaker and is going to maybe he doesn't really promote himself like that. He lets his fighting do the talking for him. Yeah. And I think that's what it is as well.
Listen, that's certainly a good theory, because it made no sense to me how some of the other guys came in where they were, and then he came in and kind of ended up on the prelims fighting some lower ranked guys. But it is what it is. I mean, he's on a rocket ship after that performance and the one before, and I think he's not too concerned. He's going to make himself undeniable. Next fight that I wanted to cover, or I guess more of a result, the outcome. One, Bobby Green. I know his name is now King Green, but I'll never get used to it. So one, Bobby King Green, received no bonus in a win against Jeremy Stevens that was impressive. I mean, let's be real. It's not like it wasn't a boring. Neither of these guys has the capability of fighting a boring fight, I think. But he did seem pretty upset. I saw him speaking to one Shawnee from Full Send MMA, kind of complain. I think that's who he was talking to, complaining that he didn't get the bonus. And Dana's response, it's a two-part response in the when he's speaking to the media after. The first is level of competition. The second is, but he's getting custom shorts. So I'm going to address these separately. level of competition, I think, is extremely relevant, extremely relevant. And what he's essentially saying here is who he did it against doesn't warrant a bonus. He did it against Jeremy Stevens, and Jeremy Stevens he's this anomaly that keeps getting like these one fight deals. It seems people are saying he has like blackmail over Dana White or the UFC. Like, how does he keep getting these one fight deals? He leaves the UFC, does bare knuckle, does all right there, does pretty good there actually. Comes back, gets what he admits is a one fight deal, but now he's back, so it's another seemingly one fight deal. So I think Dana's point is relevant. It is relevant who the competition is against, but the other side of that is like, I mean, the competition is even. I don't think that they gave, King Green somebody light years away from him. I do think that I picked him to win, and I think I think a lot of people did. He was probably the favorite. I'm not a huge bettor, so I didn't check, but he was probably the favorite. I do put his skills and abilities because he's been with the UFC and he didn't have that gap that Jeremy Stevens had. My point is, I think they're in the same realm. They're close enough that a performance bonus would have made sense. But it was just interesting to see that they are considering level of competition when it comes to those types of bonuses. And the flip side, and I want to get your take on both of them. The flip side is those shorts don't mean nothing, man. Like these guys need to feed their family. You cannot, it's like Dana sometimes says these things that I think he doesn't realize. And it's one of the reasons why I think it's funny. Like we kind of love Dana, like for these, like, it's like your uncle who like doesn't really know what he's saying. Like, you literally just said that he's not getting potentially life-changing money, especially because King Green mentioned that he is out $300,000 in jewelry ahead of this fight for whatever reason. You just said he's not going to get the bonus, but he wants some custom shorts. We'll give him some shorts. Your take on those two sides, the level of competition comment and the custom shorts.
I think the shorts comment was just ridiculous. Like you said, who gives a damn about the shorts? But as for the level of competition, didn't Jeremy Stevens go on a pretty significant losing streak before leaving the UFC?
He did.
And how did he do outside the UFC? I don't think he was, a world
He wasn't
beater
undefeated.
in bare knuckle.
He had some good, I think he had some good wins in bare knuckle, but I mean, he certainly lost his last one against Mike Perry.
Right.
Obviously, before the Mike Perry fight, he had the Mason Jones fight. That was like his weird one-off where it was in Iowa, I believe. And then before that, it looks like a 3-fight BKFC win streak: Eddie Alvarez, Bobby Taylor, and Jimmy Rivera. So some big names, but maybe outside of their, maybe performing outside the UFC standards. And so I suppose that's what Dana's alluding to.
I also, besides the fact that Jeremy's on the slide and I believe in the tail end, and, it looks like Jeremy's kind of just fighting for a paycheck at this point, which is fair. It's totally fair, right? But usually they say when that becomes the case, you should hang it up. You usually want your fighters to have that burning desire within them, right? That inspiration, that a goal rather than just a paycheck. And it seems like that's what he's fighting for now. Yeah. And maybe that could explain why he's been on such a slide. Now, as for Bobby Green, I think he didn't get the bonus possibly because he asked for it. I think there's an unspoken rule where, bro, don't put us on the spot. You know what I mean? If we decide that you've been a good boy, you're going to get the bonus. That's how the UFC overlords look at it. If we decide that you have done your task correctly and entertained the masters, if we've decided that, then we will give you your bonus. But don't go out there, cup in hand, spare change, please. Don't do that, because we're not going to have our arm twisted. We're not going to have the small violin playing for you. We don't care about the $300,000 in jewelry. Whose problem is that, bro? You know what I mean? Like who's, Bobby got to figure it out. He got to, I think a lot of fighters got to figure it out when it comes to monetizing themselves outside of the octagon as well. You can't be so dependent on the UFC and their discretionary bonuses because, it's in the word discretionary. It's up to them if they decide if, they like you enough to do that. And I think these fighters, they have so many options, man. I mean, you're telling me Bobby Green can't start a YouTube channel where he's talking about his past experiences or he's talking about, certain techniques that he's learned over the years. You're telling me he can't earn money doing that? Really? I
Well,
think he absolutely could.
I think he is investing. I just don't know if it's in the right places. I know he just opened up a strip club, so I'm just not sure
You
what the
see,
ROI is there. But listen, I wish him the absolute best, and I would agree with you that it does hurt your chances of getting these bonuses. It's such a nuanced thing to talk about, but it does hurt your chance. Probably. If I wonder if there's some statistic out there on like the frequency of somebody who asks for a bonus getting a bonus.
yeah.
Because I'm sure that everybody who asks for one, it's not like they're coming out of left field. Like I'm sure their performance made sense where it would get a bonus. So the statistic would probably be quite telling, in my opinion. But another gentleman who did not get a bonus, I believe, Sean Brady against one Joaquin Buckley. And this fight was interesting. I think more before it happened than it actually. I mean, it was a great fight. Let's not pretend it wasn't. But the interesting thing going into it was the insane betting line swing. Again, I am not a betting man. I famously say I think betting is a tax on the stupid. I do it every once in a while. If I get some sort of free bonus or whatever, just because it's fun, it makes some fights more fun. But the narrative going into this was Sean Brady, for whatever reason, is going to lose. A lot of money came in on Buckley, and it swung the betting lines dramatically. What the professionals consider dramatically. And Sean even said that he was questioned by the UFC. They asked him if everything was okay. Is there an injury? We've heard in the past that they've asked fighters on his side of this type of scandal or narrative if they owe money to anybody, if they were approached by anybody. Is the cartel holding your family hostage? Like these types of questions, which are funny to think about. But the reality is, like, when we're talking the millions and millions of dollars that are potentially won in the world of gambling, nothing is out of the picture. And so he was questioned. And in my opinion, the fact that happened made him even harder of an opponent for Buckley. Forget the fact that Buckley didn't look like he trained whatsoever. And I want to watch a quick clip and talk about it. But the fact that Sean Brady went into that match being asked if he was going to throw the fight, I presume, or if he is injured when he wasn't. He said he just had a scratch, and it certainly wasn't that. There's rumors that he wears a no strip around, and I've even talked to him about this at a CFFC event. He wears a no strip around. I think he's been questioned before if like his nose is broken, or maybe a rumor was spurring that his nose was broken. But he just wears that strip because it's one of his sponsors. I think it's one of his biggest sponsors. He has posts about it, ads and collabs. And then there was another thing about he was draining his knee, which he said publicly before that he drains his knee regularly. I think maybe the person he was speaking to, I don't know if it was Ariel or somebody else, but he said basically, oh, it's like a thing that happened. Like, sometimes people do it regularly. Do you not do it? And maybe the interviewer had no idea what he's talking about, but it's something that I've heard of before. And certainly for him, it's quite normal. So for whatever reason, that happened and the line swung the way it did. I think that made him, they say you get 30% better when you're the champion. I think when you get questioned by the athletic commission or your employer, the UFC, or by the integrity committee, the U.S. government's integrity committee, I think you fight 30% better as well. Your thoughts, I guess, on that before we watch this Buckley clip?
Man, I think he absolutely dominated Buckley. It was just, I was 50-50 on the fight because after the Morales fight, and again, Brady kind of alluded that there was something going on there, whether it be an injury or personal issues, whatever the case may be. I thought straight up, if he cannot get the takedown, he's going to lose. Well, he got the takedown and he won. And I know Buckley was training with Usman. I know all of that was going on, but part of me thinks that was just for show. Part of me thinks that was just for social media. Oh, look who I'm training with.
Right.
This will go viral and things of that nature. It's more for clout rather than actually improving your skills. As for the betting line thing, I'm not really a big gambler either because I have learned my lesson. I'm not the type of person to keep digging myself deeper, at least when it comes into gambling. I lose far more than I win. Yeah. And I decided, hey, man, it ain't for me. So I don't do the gambling thing. And in the world of mixed martial arts, with as many shady characters that lurk, I would not be surprised if, something there's a reason they ask those questions. You know,
Yeah.
there's a good reason for why they ask those questions in
Yeah.
this world. And yeah, go ahead, play the clip.
Yeah, I mean, listen, hopefully this works out, but this is a clip that I think I remember seeing it. Maybe it didn't like hit as hard as it did when it started to resurface after the fight, but this is what Buckley said in the lead up to this fight.
Not Brady Bunch. Brady Bunch, easy money. I ain't got to train for him. I do whatever for this fight, Camp. I ain't gonna lie to you. Stylistically, this is the best fight I can have. I ain't got to do nothing for this fight. Let y'all know, man, all I've been doing is sleeping, eating, and fucking.
Well,
sounds like an enjoyable fight, Camp, I'll say, but not a fruitful fight.
Certainly not effective, right? Certainly not effective. I think a lot to unpack there, and probably it's all pretty self-explanatory. There's not much for us to add, but like nobody is the easiest matchup for you. You know, you did not get mismatched here. And I think, you know, Buckley is one of those guys who he's had very low moments in his career, and he's had very high moments. I'm thinking like that knockout of the year, obviously, as much as I hate to talk about it because I love Impa Kasanganay, but you would think that somebody who's had the lows that he's had is very careful of the things he says and maybe takes his preparation for specific opponents a little bit. You know, you got to tailor make them, right? It seems like he wasn't interested in doing much wrestling, you know, training, despite him saying he was with Usman briefly. I didn't see it. But, you know, the clip speaks for itself. You know, the narrative is already out there.
One thing that I'd like to say, and this is just my overall opinion on the sport of mixed martial arts as well. I think a lot of these guys underrate the value of a good jiu-jitsu game off of your back because they focus on wrestling back up to their feet. But what happens if that doesn't happen? What happens if you are forced to play off of your back?
Mm-hmm.
Now you're a fish out of water. Yeah. Now you're sat there flopping around with Sean Brady on top of you, pummeling you, and you have no answers for it until the referee saves you because the round is over. I think more fighters need to prioritize being off of their back, investing in a jiu-jitsu game. People kind of talk about jiu-jitsu as if it doesn't work anymore nowadays. I don't know if you see the comment sections on social media and things like that, but people have a really negative opinion about jiu-jitsu. You saw it most recently show its head when Buchecha ended up losing his fight the way he did. People really talk down on that martial art, and I think its effectiveness is tried and true. I always point to Anderson Silva versus Daniel Cormier, because Daniel Cormier is a guy who he gets on top of you, he gets in half guard, he pounds you up, moves to side control, crucifix, beats you up until you turn into him, and then he'll go for a submission. Well, Anderson Silva didn't let that happen, and he's smaller than him, and it was on short notice. Anderson Silva used a lockdown from half guard, and it completely nullified Daniel Cormier, and he ended up going the distance. And in fact, the only point of that fight where anybody was even close to being finished, it was Daniel Cormier when he ate that liver shot with the front kick. So I say this to say, jiu-jitsu can be a very effective tool, and it's not always about wrestling back up to your feet. What happens if you run into the better wrestler? So I would like to see guys like Buckley invest in a jiu-jitsu game. Go ahead.
Yeah, 100%. And I think your point is even clearer. We'll talk about it just after this next topic. It's even clearer when talking about the co-main. And I want to give Joshua Van his flowers there. But real quick, between these two fights, one that's worth discussing was the Waldo Cortez Acosta decision. Waldo has been that fighter for me that I've counted out multiple times and has proven me wrong. Again, I think if I was a betting man, he would have cost me a lot of money because I just do my picks for free on Tapology, or, you know, just between my friends and I. But there's a universe where I pick Waldo Cortez Acosta to lose many times, and he proves me wrong. And so for this fight, I said, listen, this man cannot be denied. He's on a run that in the heavyweight division, nobody else is on in this very moment. And he goes out there, and I mean, I'll admit it was a close fight. The cat's out the bag. I picked Waldo Cortez Acosta to win, and I also scored it for him as unbiasedly as I can. I think I'm decent at separating my pick because there's no monetary investment in there, but I'm decent at separating my picks from kind of how I assess the fight. I think I went back and watched some clips of it, not the entire fight. but I still don't exactly see how Volkov won that fight. I still see it for Waldo. And I think the arena this is what I've noticed is that people in person there scored it for Waldo Cortez Acosta, and the only people that I spoke to who scored it for Volkov were watching on TV. And I've always wondered if there's instances like there's weird formulas of certain fighting styles or certain outcomes that happen in fights that result in that discrepancy, where in person it might feel like something and on TV it might feel like another. But I think when I wrap my head around this, what I accredit this discrepancy to, this conflict, is the way judging happens. And I just think that I love to reference the unified rules of MMA, even though the state of New Jersey hasn't actually adopted them. But they are, generally speaking, they all talk it's tricky to word how they prioritize things like volume and damage. And that's what I think is the problem here. I think that one fighter had a lot more volume and the other fighter had a lot more damage, right? Waldo may have won in the volume. It felt like he kept swinging and he took center cage and he was pushing him back and he was more active. But Volkov, I think, had the stronger damage, the more devastating strikes, and he inflicted maybe more damage on Waldo. And that is what results in these judging discrepancies, and it results in these weird decisions. What did you think? How'd you score it there in person? And what do you think, why do you think this is happening seemingly more often now?
So first thing I want to tackle is you bring up the unified rules of MMA. I hate them personally. I've been watching MMA from before we even had the unified rules to tell us how to score a fight. You get me? I feel I know how to score a fight and I know who's winning a fight just from watching the fight. I don't need some authority to tell me how to score a fight. That's the first point. The second point is I was in attendance as well. I think I was literally the section right behind you because I saw Chael Sonnen as well. Right there, I actually outed him in my section. I said, "Yo, that's Chael," and everybody was like, "What?" Yeah. But with that said, I thought Volkov won. In person, I thought Volkov won. There were people around me that also thought Volkov won. That was the feeling I thought. I feel like I heard boos when Cortez was being announced. I don't know. I like Waldo Cortez Acosta. I do. Volkov, in my opinion, is more of a I want to say boring fighter. He's not necessarily a viral guy either. Cortez has kind of been getting more of that like push from the UFC with their social media and things like that. The whole Dominican Papi and all this stuff that they try to push with him. I get it, but it was a cool fight. It was kind of uneventful in my opinion. It was a bit of a it was lackluster for me. Being there watching it, I was not on the edge of my seat. But it was fine, you know what I mean? I thought Volkov won though, personally.
Yeah, there's a lot of little like tidbits, things that come to mind. I mean, I believe if I'm remembering correctly, Volkov was the victim of a robbery, a quote unquote robbery by most people's standards in the opposite direction against Cyril Gane in his last out. And so maybe this is their way of the world's way, right? Because I don't think it was concocted or planned. It's the world's way of kind of paying him back for that. So there's, there's that piece. I also, part of me wonders if like Waldo Cortez Acosta took a risk he didn't need to take. He's been extremely active. I've always been the one who's like, let's not reward fighters for doing something they're supposed to do. But it does feel like maybe he could have passed on this and been, had a longer training camp, had a longer, break, I suppose, from fighting. But, that's a much more opinionated thing. The exact opposite of this fight, your thoughts and my thoughts on this were, kind of lackluster, but the exact opposite. Joshua Van versus Tatsuro Taira, the co-main event, the flyweight championship of the world. Listen, call him what you want, call him a paper champion, call him a fraud, whatever you want to call Joshua Van. I mean, as a hardcore Pantoja fan, I love his fighting style, his demeanor, his story, his personality, just everything about him. It definitely sucked to see the way Joshua Van won that fight, and I never was one to put too much stock into like he celebrated or he calls himself the champion. I actually think the opposite. I think when Justin Gaethje threw the interim title, it was a bit disrespectful, and I think to deny your position or your title or whatever can sometimes come off as even more bitter, right? Like a sore winner or whatever. But call him what you will. I think he proved myself and a lot of people wrong. I picked Tatsuro Taira. I think that he would win. I thought that Tatsuro Taira was just way too, good at getting folks into positions that he wanted and dominating in those positions. His grappling game is one. I thought he can keep up on the feet. I mean, I knew that Joshua Van had a chin and I knew that he had volume, but I just didn't know if he had the sharpness or the fight IQ that some of the other contenders in his division have. And he completely, shut me down and shut me out. And that fight was incredible. And you talked earlier about jiu-jitsu being like kind of dying, right? An underappreciated, underutilized part of the sport. Joshua Van, not only did he do what Buckley couldn't do, which is great takedown defense, he also, it's like he went a step further and he trained what do you actually do on the ground. So they do get you down, right? The takedown defense doesn't work. They get you down. Like there's clips of, there's a funny clip that started going viral where it's like he just got up. It's the Derek Lewis style of like jiu-jitsu where like this guy's on top of me and I just decided to stand up. I think I don't know what there was like funny name like Thug Jitsu or something, whatever. But he did that like once or twice in the fight where like Tatsuro's on top of him. And it just seems like, all right, I'm going to just post my elbow. Then I'm going to post my arm. Then I'm going to push you off. Then I'm going to lean you over. Then I'm going to just jump up. And now we're standing. And he did that like twice in the fight. And in that moment, I was like, this kid knows what he's doing. He did his homework. And he was not just prepping for Tatsuro Taira. I think he was prepping for Tatsuro Taira and then Alessandro Pantoja right after. So that fight was incredible. I think it deserves, I think they got the fight of the night or something like that. Deserved it. And Joshua Van, in my opinion, he hasn't righted the wrong. It's not his fault that the fight went the way it did, but he hasn't righted that wrong with Pantoja. But he certainly, it looked like he leveled up, certainly in my eyes. Your thoughts?
So I have a couple of hot takes on this fight.
Let's hear them.
Firstly, I thought it was an early stoppage. I did, and I'm going to say that because Tatsuro Taira, he showed a lot of heart in this fight. He got beat up at times for sure, and you got to let a guy survive. He had to survive throughout the fight earlier when he got dropped and almost finished. You got to let a guy, especially in the 5th round, go out on his shield. This guy from Japan, they celebrate martial arts culture over there. They celebrate the Bushido culture, warrior spirit. All that stuff is very relevant in Japan. And Tatsuro Taira carries that, and he showed that in the fight, the warrior spirit. And you're going to stop the fight for what? For fighter safety? I hate to break it to you guys, but fighter safety does not exist, okay? Fighting is inherently dangerous. If you believe in fighter safety, what you need to do is try to abolish the sport of MMA, okay? Because it is not safe. The last place where safety happens is in the octagon, okay? So don't give me this fighter safety thing. Plus, it's a championship fight, okay? This is the pinnacle. You're not saving some young prospect for another day. This is the day. You get me? It's the championship fight. This is the biggest opportunity of his life. Let him at least try to survive. And then people saying, oh, he would have just got knocked out anyways. Let him get knocked out. It's okay.
You want a clean, cold finish.
I want a decisive ending. I don't want a guy who, as soon as the ref jumps in, he's throwing his hands up. That's the last thing I want. And that's exactly what he did. He threw up his hands immediately. Dude, listen, in this sport, what do we admire? We admire heart. We admire toughness. We admire these things. So why are we going to punish someone when they're given the opportunity to show it? I don't think that's right. I think it's fighting. I think sometimes you get beat up. And I always bring up Brock Lesnar versus Shane Carwin, where Brock Lesnar's getting pounded on by Shane Carwin. And you know what his defense was? That was his defense. Was just curling up in the fetal position and taking it. And sometimes that's all you could do is take it. It's like Floyd Mayweather said when he was getting ready to fight Conor McGregor. You can give it, but you better be ready to take it. And some people are good at taking it. It just is what it is. That's the whole idea of a fight. It's the back and forth, the seesaw effect. Give him the chance. And again, if he loses and goes out on his shield, that's even more honorable. That's even more something where it's like, damn, he went out on his shield, dude. You know what I mean? Like, that's something that is admirable. Now, as for the fight itself as a whole, I think Pantoja, had he been healthy, because I don't know what is going to happen going forward, right? Maybe that fight changes him forever. Who knows? But seeing what Tyra was able to do to Joshua Van in the grappling, I think Pantoja would have easily been able to do that as well to Joshua Van. But I'm not sure he does that to him if they have a rematch, because again, that fight may change him. You know, it truly may change him. Joshua Van's going to have more confidence than ever before going into that fight, etc., etc. The other hot take that I had was this. You know, Joshua Van, I had no problem with the way he won. He came out and said, "Listen, they teach you how to break fall in class," and that's true. He's a black belt, Pantoja. Okay, he should know how to fall. He should know from the years upon years and hours of training in the gym to not post your arm out like that, okay? And he did, and he suffered the consequences. So this idea that, oh, it's not a real win, bro, it's no different than a guy who doesn't know how to check leg kicks. If the guy doesn't know how to fall, that's a part of his game that's lacking. What happens if you go up against a judo player like a Ronda Rousey type who's going to toss you over her hip and slam you on your head? You know what I mean? What happens? You have to know how to fall. He didn't know how to fall. He suffered the consequences of that. Shout out Joshua Van. I will say this, though. My one criticism of Joshua Van, he should have came out to Finetto. It was such a missed opportunity. Finetto by Chief Keef, if you're familiar with this song, it's the famous line, "We gonna blow New Jersey up." That would have been crazy heat, and I think the crowd would have been lit if he came out to that.
Listen, no gripes on the song suggestion, but let me ask you this real quick, since we're going down this rabbit hole for a split second. Chris Weidman, Anderson Silva snapping their legs. Where do you place that? Whose fault? Do you have the same sentiment in terms of, like, do you think they threw those kicks wrong? You know, I guess what I'm trying to get at is I classified Pantoja's arm situation as a freak accident. The definition of fluke is very gray and different for each person. For me, I think a fluke is an injury that wasn't the person who the winner or the person who imposed the injury was not attempting to do that, right? If you punch somebody and you break their orbital or you break their nose, you were aiming for that. You were punching their face in order to do damage to their face. But if somebody trips and their leg snaps, or somebody, trips over a limb, or they get, pushed in a certain way, whatever the case may be, and an injury takes place, I would consider that a fluke. It doesn't change to me that I think Joshua Van won, because part of fighting is protecting yourself, and that includes how to fall. But I guess what I want to ask you is the leg kicks, the leg snapping, Anderson Silva, Chris Weidman. Do you see that the same way?
Yeah, I think, they got their leg kicks checked. It's simple as that. It's a defense. That's what it is. When Dustin Poirier blocks Connor's kick with his elbow, that's a version of checking a kick as well. They talk about that. They say that's why you have to be accurate. That's why you have to, kick in the right places, because if you run into an elbow, you could break your foot. This is something that when you learn these techniques. So Anderson Silva, Chris Weidman, Conor McGregor, you have to kick the correct way. You can't just go in there kicking willy-nilly. Even Rich Franklin versus Chuck Liddell. Rich Franklin broke his arm in that fight because he blocked the kick from Chuck Liddell. You can't just block kicks any old way. You can't block a kick with your forearm. Someone's swinging a baseball bat at you, essentially, and you're just going to block it with your upper forearm near the wrist. Really? That's how you get your forearm broken. Rampage Jackson talks about how he would check or block head kicks, rather, and he blocks it completely like this, because you're hitting the crux here. This is all meat. This is power, not this. You know what I mean? So you have to know these techniques. So that's how I see it.
Well, for whatever reason, maybe it's just because I love Pantoja so much. I see it a little bit different between the kicks and that. But with that being said, I mean, that's everything that we can really discuss. It was an incredible card. It was a great experience. It was a lot of fun breaking it down with you. I had some other things planned, talking about the White House fighter kits and some other stuff. But I think we're at a good point here. I think going through the card the way we did, there's a lot that happened.
You want to do a rapid fire? You want to rapid fire it?
I mean, it was really just the fighter kits. I don't know if you've seen them or not, but
I haven't seen them.
I think go see them, and we'll do something in the future with it. But it was a great card overall, like I said, and some great takeaways. And I'm interested to see what is next for a lot of these fighters. Maybe we go through the card at some point and kind of try to match make the future. But I want to thank you for joining me. I want to thank everybody for watching and listening. And we will see you guys on the next episode of the MMA Dungeon. I am AmAngeloMedia on YouTube. Is that right? All socials?
Correct.
Yeah, check out my boy, IamAngeloMedia. He'll definitely be back on soon. And with that being said, thank you. God bless. We'll see you guys later.